All right, so for my creative project, I was fascinated by all the paintings of Jackson Pollock and the way that he makes these like paintings on giant canvases out of these splatters. So I did my research on it, and there's a lot more to it than just like standing over a canvas and just like splashing paint. So I'm going to try the best of my ability to recreate the method of Jackson Pollock. My canvas is not perfect, but I'm very broke, so we're taking what I can get. So we're just going to start out a little bit laying the groundwork. So one thing that Pollock liked to do was, because obviously he's not touching the canvas, he didn't really have a reason to use normal brushes. He didn't like brush strokes, and so he kind of just used whatever he could get. The only brushes that he used were ones that were like hardened rock solid, or he would use sticks, or maybe just the wrong side of a paintbrush. So just whatever we could do splatter and make it more interesting in a picture. So another interesting thing that I learned when really looking into how Pollock painted, one thing I found out was that he preferred not to use actual normal paint that a painter would use. He preferred this enamel-based paint, which is basically any surface paint, stuff you could paint your car with it. And he preferred it because it was a lot thinner and more viscous, so I guess less viscous. So the idea was that rather than just splashing it on the canvas, he wanted a thin paint so that you could see within each splash and each stroke the movement that made it. With a thin paint, you can kind of make a movement, and the paint can move in the air to make a better shape and spread better in the air. So this one is our all-surface enamel paint. So what I just mentioned about how Pollock preferred enamel paint, any surface paint, he preferred it in general because it was thinner, and in general it is thinner, but unfortunately my supplies are not quite as good as Pollock's, so it appears that this paint may have been sitting out for a little while, and it's kind of congealing a little bit more than it should, but it's making an interesting pattern. The paint that should be making the least viscous moves and making the most lines and spreading the most and twirling in the air is actually sticking together the most and creating the fattest and most individual splatters. So Pollock used materials of any size to paint. He would go with small brushes like I've been working with now, and he could go bigger. We're going with slightly bigger. And the idea was that each material and each tool would make some kind of different effect. So by being creative, he could basically change what he was making just by, deciding that for this one he was going to paint with a crusty old paint roller. So we're going to try that out. So while we are along the lines of using creative tools, one of the things that Pollock was known for using on his paintings as a tool was he would use a turkey baster, because it would pick up from the outside and he could spray. Unfortunately, I do not have a turkey baster because I have no reason to own one, but I think we're doing our best to get creative. So sidewalk chalk, why not? You can see how changing your tool can drastically change the way that, like, the pattern it creates. It's not, I think it's interesting that it wasn't just Pollock just deciding, oh, I think it'd be funny to paint with a turkey baster, or like, you know, what if I just like messed around and painted with a stick. He experimented with the idea of using non-traditional forms. I mean, he was already non-traditional by standing over the canvas rather than painting directly on it, standing up. Additionally, you know, pretty unorthodox to paint by splatters, but so it fits along with his kind of ideology artistically, that he would experiment with anything that was available, because the idea was variety. And so going with something small, you can see within the painting the movement in each of them. The idea was that with the paint, you could imagine by seeing a twist or a curve or a fat splatter like this one, you could imagine what it took to make that exact spot. And you can see even just individually, like if I come over here, you can see within this little area. So right here, my sidewalk chalk has created these thin lines here because it's coming off the point. So I've already got a small tool, but it's even smaller at the end, so it's creating the smallest point and creating these thin lines. Whereas then my enamel paint that has sat out for a little bit too long with a paintbrush came in more traditional straight splatters, but because it was old paint, you can see it kind of congealing a little bit more and making bigger splats. And then you can see my red with the roller is fatter in some places, but smaller and more spread out in other places. And then the traditional paintbrush with the black is the most reminiscent of like the Pollock with splattering off of a hardened paintbrush. So it's interesting how you can tell, or at least I can tell as the person who is making it, as I look back at it, I can tell which tool made which. And I think it's like interesting to like be able to look at a Pollock and know that if lines look different, it's for a reason. All right, so we've gone smaller. Now we're gonna go bigger with just a big old piece of wood. It's actually really fascinating to see it come together, because like the first couple strokes, you feel a little bit like an idiot. You feel kind of like you're a guy standing in a big open room throwing paint on a giant piece of foam. But then you do it again, and 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 it starts to make sense. Like I'm starting to get it, I think. It's not meaningless thing of just throwing paint down. It comes together and becomes a bigger thing than it was before. In channeling the late Bob Ross, obviously it's a little bit different and abstract, but it reminds me of the Bob Ross famous phrase that there's no mistakes, there's only happy accidents. That there's something that is like freeing about painting on here because you can't get it wrong. Like the green paint here, over there, and over here, especially right here, has congealed a bit more because a lot of this is pretty old paint. But that's perfectly fine. This texture that was part of Pollock's style was the idea that you can stand in front of it and it fills up your whole area flat, but that you can see texturally what's happening on the wall. It's not like painting on a canvas where it's all flat against the canvas. It jumps out a little bit more in separate places. So you can see how much of a difference it makes not only having a more thicker paint with this one, but a bigger tool, especially the fact that it's flat along the end, because like I was talking about with the sidewalk chalk comes to a thin point, so it creates these thin lines because that's the point that it's dripping off of. Whereas you kind of see, if I try and get some more paint on this, there's not a specific point really for it to drip off of, so it drips off a little bit weird. And part of that is, this is very thick and old paint, but it comes off a lot thicker because it doesn't have a spot to drip off of. So one thing that is also usually evoked surrounding Pollock is the idea of movement with the paint. So I've already talked about, you can see the movement of the arm, you can see a curve or a splash, and you can in some way imagine what kind of arm movement or elbow turn could have created that. But even on top of that, the idea of his own movement around the canvas, about having a bigger space to work on, he could move around and see it from different angles and make different decisions as he painted. He didn't stay locked in one spot on a smaller canvas. He could get every angle on it. And a lot of videos of Pollock painting at his time, there's only a few, but it almost kind of looks like he's dancing a little bit. Like, he does a lot of this sidestepping and he's just in it. He's going around and he doesn't stay in one spot for too long because the idea is movement, more movement. So the movement of the arm, the movement of the paint, and the movement of his body. So, just one more thing that I found interesting about the way that Pollock painted is that freedom with his tools as far as putting paint on the canvas wasn't even just limited to, like, he didn't have to use brushes, he could use something like a turkey baster or sidewalk chalk, but that he wasn't even limited to using a tool, that it wasn't abnormal and it wasn't a mistake for him to just toss on some paint. It's a little bit thick right there, but you get the idea. So it is continuing to fascinate me that I was interested in learning how Pollock did it, but in learning about it, one thing that gets talked about is the idea that when he painted, I talked about he would kind of move around and kind of flow around the piece to get it from different angles, see it from different angles, and get the movement. But one thing they talk about a lot with Pollock is that when he would go, it was almost like the dance was almost like he was in a trance. He was in the zone. It was just him going at the canvas. And my paint may be old and lumpy, and I may be pouring paint on a foam board that has already been painted on for Greek Week, but I'm starting to get it. Like I can very much understand how you would get like lost in this. It makes sense to just want to just keep moving around it. And you're not really thinking about, well, what color am I putting here? Oh, I have too much red on the left side. You know, maybe I should add some more black on the front, or like, you know, I want equal red to blue ratio. That's not the idea. It's the opposite of the idea. The idea is that you kind of go to that place and you just paint. So I kind of just now come to another realization about this, and that is with motion, it comes emotion, because I've kind of been the whole time doing these floaty, kind of curved things, or drops, getting some drops down there. You can see on the black that changing, like the emotion that you give with it, completely changes the pattern. If you paint with an angry brush stroke, you're gonna see an angry brush stroke. It comes through on the canvas. You can very clearly see that those black ones, they have much more sharp edges, far out splatters. If you change the motion, it changes what you're making. And so you're kind of not just experimenting with different paints and different tools. You're experimenting with you know, getting close and painting gentle versus just splatter. You feel different when painting. It is kind of like stress relieving to just like take a dry paintbrush covered in paint. It's awesome. So, unexpectedly, I guess par for the course of painting with old, broken tools is my paint roller has come off, and I think it made it better. The paint roller entirely came off the handle and made this really cool pattern. You can't make a mistake, and it makes it so much fun. All right, so I feel like I'm about finished with this masterpiece. It has turned out surprisingly well. It's kind of like weird to see at the beginning and at the end. I feel like you actually did something. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm sweating profusely. It is quite a workout. It's a pretty good workout just walking around in circles, aggressively splashing paint, and twirling it. I think it's interesting now, looking at it here at the end, to think about how you can see within each little spot here, you can see the spaces, especially along the edges. You can see spaces where black took over and black just covered this whole area and then became immediately overcome by red. And you can see where the blue's at the top. And then now it's not. And you can, by looking at it, you have to get kind of close. And you have to really look at it and think about it. But I genuinely do believe now that a Jackson Pollock painting is not just a bunch of splashes on a canvas. It's not just standing and throwing stuff down and saying this is art. Like, now that I've done this, I realize now that you can tell the story of it if you give it the time. I think that's really cool. It has been very interesting. It is a lot of fun. You can kind of see there's a reason that Pollock moved all the way around the canvas, because I mostly stuck to one side. You can see up here, there's a lot more background open space because the beginning of the splash is all landed on the front rather than the back. So I guess that's something to learn for next time. Just be more careful with making sure to fully surround the piece. I would strongly recommend just putting out a giant piece of foam and painting on it like Jackson Pollock for like an hour, because it is a good workout and is kind of therapeutic. This is my Pollock. Whew.